Hello, this is Joe Pusateri, and I'm living the sober life. Today, I would like to begin to talk about the 12th step, and I'm going to do this in a couple different parts here, and you'll see why. Or if you are familiar with the 12 steps, you'll probably understand why, because the 12th step is very densely compact. There's a lot going on there. And as the 12th and final step, to some degree, it encapsulates everything that comes before it. The 12th step is, what is the 12th step? Well, it is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other alcoholics or addicts and practice these principles in all our affairs. So, a lot going on there. First of all, let's talk about the spiritual awakening bit. All right, so the 12th step says having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So obviously, the point, the purpose of the 11 steps leading up to the 12th step is to have a spiritual awakening. Why? What's that all about? Well, I have to tell you a little bit of history. So the 12 steps originally come from the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Alcoholics Anonymous was founded by a gentleman named Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith. And Bill Wilson came across a person named Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher was a childhood friend of Bill's, and he had gotten sober through an organization called the Oxford Group. And as a part of his staying sober, he needed to go and testify or give his story to somebody else. And so he goes to Bill Wilson, who he knows is a bad alcoholic, and tells him his story. Person I believe that brings sobriety to Ebby Thatcher is a guy named Roland Hazard. Roland Hazard was a wealthy individual who, bad alcoholic, and had been traveling in Europe and was analyzed for his alcoholism by the famous psychoanalyst Dr. Carl Jung. And the story goes that when Dr. Jung was analyzing Roland Hazard, he said first, treats him, looks at him, sends him on his way, should be cured, shouldn't drink anymore. And then shortly thereafter, the guy gets drunk. And so he goes back to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Oh, I've misdiagnosed you. You are, in fact, a alcoholic of the hopeless variety," some kind of language like that. There is no hope for you. Roland was like, "Really? There's no hope at all for me?" "Nope, sorry." I mean, is there nothing that can be done? Is there never a case that somebody like me ever recovers? And Carl Jung was like, "Well, occasionally there are these things called vital spiritual experiences." I believe that's how William James describes it, philosopher, psychologist that comes before then. Vital spiritual experience, a psychic change, a complete and total personality rearrangement and reorganization. And they're very rare. They come sometimes through the process of deep spirituality, but short of that, I really don't know what to do for you. So this is where the idea comes from that you need to have a spiritual awakening. And in fact, the literature that underpins the 12 steps says that only a total and complete psychic change will make it possible for somebody to live the rest of their life without drinking. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because alcoholism isn't just it isn't just on the level of behavior where it's defined by somebody who drinks too much or uses drugs or engages in a certain behavior. That's what you see from the outside. But in fact, the phenomenon of addiction is underpinned by an entire, complete, comprehensive, and totally coherent system of thinking and a system of being and a way of seeing the world. So alcoholism or addiction is really the manifestation of all of these different things that are going on behind the scenes. So an alcoholic or addict will see the world a certain way. They will see offenses against their character that are not really there. They will experience undue stress and strain in situations that other people would not. Alcoholics and addicts sometimes, for whatever reason, they're, wired differently. Their brains behave differently. They have learned to use substances to deal with these certain types of stresses and strains. And so when you develop in such a way where you have the predisposition for this condition and you use drugs or alcohol or whatever to find relief for the stress and strain of an unmanageable life, then you will invariably develop an entire way of thinking, a way of seeing, a way of perceiving, a way of being that is all connected together that needs to be changed. Well, how do you change all that? You can't just take the alcohol away. If you had, and sometimes people like this actually show up, I think, in the rooms, and that's fine, but if you just have somebody whose problem is drinking, meaning that, they drink too much, they act like a fool, they get into some trouble, they, get a DUI, they say things they don't mean, sometimes there are people like this, and you take away the alcohol or the drugs, and everything gets better because alcohol or drugs was the problem. But what we're talking about with alcoholics or addicts is that if you take the drugs or alcohol away in some strange, perverse, hard to understand way, things actually get worse because now that person does not have the self-medication that they were using in order to deal with the problem of seeing the world the way that they do and the way of experiencing the world the way that they do and feeling all that stress and strain that normal people do not feel. And this isn't just mild irritation. I mean, I don't want people who are not alcoholic or addicts to get the wrong idea. I mean, this is like stress and strain that goes on so long that just makes life absolutely miserable. So anyway, I don't want to go, I think I've explained that enough. So a total and complete psychic change is necessary. Well, how do how do those happen? Well, before 12-step recovery, I don't know because I wasn't there, but the best that I can tell is the way that these things happen were kind of, by chance. Individuals have some type of, they get involved in some kind of spiritual community or, they have some kind of encounter with God. It's, kind of mystical, hard to predict, hard to produce. People get struck by the proverbial bolt of lightning, I suppose. So the 12 steps are a systematic way of trying to produce in people the same spiritual awakening that is necessary to produce a psychic change in individuals so that they do not have to drink. All right, so that is the first part that I want to talk about in the 12th step. And I will soon post a part 2 and a part 3. Is that if you take the drugs or alcohol away in some strange, perverse, hard to understand way, things actually get worse.